Welcome to Storytimer. Connie and Chad Fivecoate. If two bodies were found less than a mile from Ted Bundy's house, would you think that Ted Bundy did it? On Thursday, July 18th, 1974, 33-year-old Connie Jo Fivecoate and her 8-year-old son Chad went to the park. Her husband, Clarence, was at work. Their teenage daughter, Christine, stayed home. It was a hot and humid day with highs in the mid-80s, which is pretty typical for summer in Indiana. Connie and Chad went to Houston Park in Logansport, Indiana. There's a creek there and nice trails through the woods. In the July heat, it's a good place to cool off and splash around and wade. Connie was 5'2" and 120 pounds. She and Chad both had blonde hair and might have looked like a couple of kids together rather than a mother and her son, since Connie was petite and Chad was growing up. When they did not return home that night, Clarence Fivecoate called the police. Police found Connie's car, a 1974 silver-colored Lincoln Continental Mark IV, at the park. Connie and Chad were nowhere around. The park was searched extensively. They had been missing 8 days when an article in the paper offered a $1,000 reward for information on their return. A phone number accompanied the article asking for tips. The Fivecoate family had recently sold their waste disposal business. The new company kept Clarence on as a manager. The deal had been a windfall for the family. The Lincoln Continental might have been purchased to celebrate this bit of luck. It also might have been a graduation gift, as Connie had just graduated from the Purdue University Realty course and was embarking upon a real estate career. The Howard County Sheriff's Office continued with numerous searches but turned up nothing. Finally, an anonymous tip that originated in Howard County was called into the Stark County Sheriff about where the bodies could be found. Howard County officers also assisted in searching this area. On Wednesday, August 14th, Connie and Chad were found in shallow graves in a wet and marshy wooded area near Culver, Indiana. It was a spot east of Bass Lake in southeast Stark County. The summer heat and moisture of the mud left them badly decomposed. Connie had been shot 3 times in the back of the head, and her son Chad had been shot once, also in the back of the head. A small caliber gun had been used. They were both found wearing their bathing suits. Chad was found in a grave 12 to 18 inches deep, about 50 to 75 yards off the old lane that ran through the woods. That land had been subdivided recently, but building and construction had not yet begun. Connie was buried a bit further away in a clearing. Maybe the tree roots had made digging too difficult, and so she was dragged further away where digging would be easier. Someone had kidnapped them in broad daylight at the park and murdered them both. But who and why? They didn't take the expensive brand new Lincoln Continental. Why not? Robbery doesn't seem like the motive here at first glance. Connie and Chad were laid to rest at Sunset Memory Gardens in Kokomo. My heart goes out to their devastated family and friends. This mother and her son should still be here. I first read about this case a few months ago. I've been finding quite a few murders in this area, and I believe many are the work of serial killer Danny Rouse. I put off writing and digging into this one because I saw that some individuals were arrested and charged and convicted. At that time, I was still looking for unsolved murders. Who is Danny Rouse? It's a long story. The first murder that we know Rouse committed was in September of 1974. He shot Nellie Mikesels through the window of her home while she sat in her rocking chair. In 1975, he killed Leila Hildebrandt with a shotgun blast on a deserted stretch of road as she drove by on a dark October night. In October of '79, he had moved to Wichita, Kansas, and attacked a woman, Catherine Crowley, and murdered her 5-year-old son, Jason Learst. He was sentenced to life in prison in Kansas, but was paroled in 2006. He returned to Indiana and murdered Stephanie Wagner on Halloween night by stabbing and strangling her. I've since found other murders that I believe he committed. George Murphy Jr., June 30th, 1974, was killed in almost the exact same spot as Leila Hildebrandt. He had head trauma that could have been a shotgun blast that went unnoticed. Coroners were often untrained then. Murphy was just a young man of little means, and poor people don't always get the best investigations. Barbara Menzie and Brenda Ginter were both young mothers in the area. Both were stabbed and strangled in their homes in 1975, much like Stephanie Wagner would be decades later in 2006. I also think that Danny Rouse shot Stella Becker in 1976 in Sharpsville. Her murder is so similar to Nellie Mikesell's that you could just about switch their names in the newspaper articles. William H. Nagel was shot in 1977 while driving almost exactly like Leila Hildebrandt had been in 1975. I've written about all of those individuals in my blog and recorded those stories on my YouTube channel. Most of them did not have searchable names before on Google. They were buried in old newspaper article archives behind paywalls, but their names are searchable and more accessible now. Back to the Fivecoate murders. I initially doubted that this was done by Rouse. 3 people were convicted of it after all. And in the murders that we know that Rouse did, he did not move any bodies. He didn't kidnap or abduct anyone that we know of either. But the fact that the bodies were found so close to his home really intrigued me. They were taken from Kokomo and brought so much closer to his home turf. It's miles and miles north of Kokomo. This seemed significant. What are the odds that a mother and son would be abducted and murdered and buried so very close to the home of a serial killer? But then again, this is the 1970s. Violent crime was rising all over the country. But it could have been him. If he did kill Junior Murphy in 1974, this murder would come just a few weeks later. Was he on a roll? Was he on a spree? Police at the time were eager to solve the case. Who wouldn't be? The Fivecoate family were good people. The community was devastated. People wanted justice. 3 people would be arrested for these heinous murders. Ralph Murphy, 35, worked for the Parks Department. He was arrested walking down the street one day. He was interviewed without counsel present, and so was his wife. Ralph was told that if he took a polygraph, he would be released. Ultimately, a 65-page confession would be obtained. Charles Lockhart, 21, and his 19-year-old girlfriend, Marianne Larson, were also arrested. Marianne was convinced to become a cooperating witness and testify against the others. The story was that the trio had kidnapped Connie and Chad from their home. Then the kidnappers forced Connie Fivecoate to cash checks, apparently. Then they killed the pair and buried them. Why, then, was the brand new Lincoln left at the park? If the kidnappers took Connie and Chad from home, why take the car to the park? Maybe it was just a convenient place to park it and distance themselves from it. But if robbery was the motive, why leave the most expensive item just sitting there? The more that I read the newspaper articles, the more questions that I have. Did these 3 really kill Connie and Chad, or did they just find Connie's purse somewhere? Why was her brand new expensive car left at Houston Park? If robbery was the motive, why didn't they take that shiny new Lincoln? Lockhart supposedly led police to the bodies. Lockhart said he had been hunting and noticed the graves, and he reported the discovery of the bodies. This is all taken from appeal documents in the years after the murders. He was hoping, it said, to get the $1,000 reward. But in detailed news articles about the discovery and recovery of the bodies, there's no mention of a suspect or a citizen leading them to the bodies. They talk about the lights that the fire department had to string through the woods. They talk about Stark County and Howard County officials working together through the night at the scene. They describe the terrain, the mud, the lane that led back into the woods, the depth of the graves. But those original newspaper reporters never mentioned seeing a civilian walking with police and pointing out the graves. Why not? Wouldn't that have been incredibly newsworthy? Ralph Murphy would be sentenced to death, but he was not put to death by the state. He's not listed among those who were executed by the state of Indiana. I also could not find him as currently incarcerated. I haven't found an obituary or anything about parole. I assume that he passed away in prison. Charles Lockhart was sentenced to life in prison, but was paroled in 2004. Marianne Larson was a cooperating witness, but pled guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to 10 years in the Indiana Women's Prison. But what if they didn't do it? What if the serial killer who lived just down the road from those shallow graves was actually responsible? So many years have gone by. Perhaps Murphy, Lockhart, and Larson really did commit these murders. But what if they didn't? What are the odds that of all the places to conceal two bodies in Indiana, lakes, rivers, woods, fields, 92 counties to choose from, and they took these two to a spot so incredibly close to the home of a man that we now know was a serial killer, a varied modus operandi in the 1970s? What are the odds? Rest in peace, Connie and Chad Fivecoate.